anti-competitive activities, and what could it cost global companies, the likes of Google, Facebook, to get into anti-competitive activities or to be a part of those activities which the antitrust regulator in India does not like, does not want. The new digital competition law entails a 10% penalty of the global turnover, a very hard, strict action that is not going to go down well with a lot of global players, Kartik.
So as I see it, Shweta, obviously this is a case which has been building the world over, not just in India. And in fact, I believe, India is taking inspiration from the EU and perhaps a little bit of inspiration from the US as well in drafting or even proposing such sort of laws to ever be enacted. Now, 10% of global turnover as penalty is something which, to my limited understanding, is not going to pass. I don't think any court is going to stand by that particular decision if the Indian government does roll it out. But I think the larger story here is that the fundamental difference between the Competition Act right now protecting smaller companies from the digital monopolies of the big tech is what is referred to as post ante.
Ex ante.
So what is being proposed now is in fact ex ante. So in the case of ex ante, you will actually be able to preempt. It's going to be a preemptive sort of an action taken under the scope of the law,
preemptive action,
as opposed to a complaint getting addressed later. So there is going to be a law in place which is going to prevent the formation of digital monopolies, as opposed to an absence of a law and then a digital monopoly gets formed and then the Competition Act comes into being and says that, hey, now there is time for you to split up your operations or for you to split up your company into multiple parts to continue to operate, domestically in India or serve the Indian population. That is the broader contour. But what are we really fighting here? I think, that is what is absolutely important to understand. We are seeing a complete fallout right now between a lot of Indian app makers which were penalized by Google Play Store, and those apps were removed pretty much overnight, 200 of them from the Google Play Store. Now, why does Google have so much power to disable Indians? And 95% of Indians use the Android platform on their smartphones. Those 95% of Indians, and India is the largest smartphone market in the world with the largest number of cheapest data connections. But all of those Indians were deprived of using a certain number of apps which Google felt were, or in fact Google stated, were not paying what was required to be paid to Google. Now, these apps and big names including InfoEdge and many others really saying that that particular fee structure which Google has put in place is anti-competitive and is antitrust in nature. So this is just one of the examples of how a big tech can really use its dominance, abuse its dominance and penalize businesses and deprive citizens, and which is why the government of India had to step in and have some sort of a reconciliation between Google and between these Indian app developers and app marketers. Now, the question here is, is the government of India going to be able to push through with a law like this? What is the kind of resistance we will face? And in Europe, the problem has also reached a point where, Google has continued to abuse its market dominance because OEMs, which are makers of mobile phones, have to bundle the Google services and Google apps as part of the mobile phones being sold. And you cannot uninstall those apps like the Google search bar or Google Maps, or Chrome. These are apps which are pre-built into any device, and by virtue of your inability to uninstall them, you have to hook onto them and you have to use them.
All right. So
Google has been infamous, in fact, even in the past, by launching its Chrome browser and pretty much killing Netscape, which had come as an alternative to Internet Explorer, which was until then a Microsoft product which was controlling the market and was a dominant player.
So essentially the allegations are that some of these big tech companies are killing competition.
That's right.
And they're also killing indigenous players who are relatively small, cannot afford to pay the kind of fees that many of these platforms demand, and also using antics which may not be beneficial to consumers in a respective territory. It may be in the US, UK or in India in this case. So all in all, these big tech bullies monopolies, therefore abusing their power and their dominance in the market to ensure that monopoly. Now, government is suggesting that we will ex ante essentially preempt some of these actions that could be anti-competitive and levy a 10% penalty on the global turnover. It could not be implemented. It's not very easy, Kartik. Come to think of it, as we understand, many of these big tech companies are going to take this law to court. It is still a bill. It's in draft stage. It hasn't really become an act so far.
So, what happened about almost 2 decades ago, around the time at the turn of the millennium, you had a similar law being proposed and a similar order being passed by a US judge against Microsoft, saying that Microsoft, by virtue of being the only, so to speak, operating system which enables PCs to boot, should not bundle other products like the MS Office, and hence Microsoft should split up into multiple companies, at least 2 companies, and not be this one dominant force. We saw about 10 years after that a similar order being passed even against Google. And Google was then Google, it was not Alphabet, but the order, or rather the order of the judges in EU back then was that Google, by way of controlling such a large share of mind and share of application space, should split up into multiple companies. But we haven't seen that. In fact, Google now has a parent called Alphabet, which now, in addition to Google, has multiple other companies also which it controls. So broadly, I think, the concern of every government out there is that there is going to be a digital dominance, there is going to be a digital monopoly in the hands of very few select big tech companies, and those big tech companies will not allow competition to come into the fray, and they will, by virtue of being a monopoly, be able to charge any sort of fees that they deem fit, and companies which want to operate in the digital landscape will have to comply. And that is what governments across the world are trying to fight. EU already has its law in place. US is still trying to get a law in place. India is just taking baby steps right now, but we haven't really seen much success anywhere in the world where big tech has thus far been government has been able to rein in big tech in a way that these monopolies get eradicated.
All right, and hopefully the digital competition law that is likely to come into effect later this year could help solve the big tech problems. We don't know, but the law is still in its very formative stage.